regardless of your belief, you could call it intuition, whatever you want to call it. I think there are signs. I truly believe there are
Yeah,
signs that point us in various directions, but I also believe in free will, right? So, like
yeah,
how you said, would I
which
have done it? Would I have done anything differently? So, what I would have potentially done differently, I don't think I would have changed anything with the ConocoPhillips thing because I think that would have been the same kind of outcome. Even if Justine would have moved with me or something like that,
mhm,
I don't know if I would have still been with them at this time. Like, given that, and that
mhm,
was just a great jump start to my career, and
mhm,
I felt like that was the time to leave. If I had done something differently at General Mills, one thing I have learned since then, I learned a lot from that experience, is that, when I first started, it's like you control your career. You have to take control of your career. You
yeah,
hear that in the corporate Kool-Aid,
yeah,
kickoff meetings and things like that. It's true. I
yeah,
found that out, and I looking back, it's like I could have probably removed some of those barriers that were happening before they became insurmountable.
mhm.
Turn this up, turn this up.
Your professional development is one of the keys to your career success. When you combine your desire to grow with actionable steps, your journey to success becomes an incredible reality. Welcome to the IncrediPaul podcast. And now, sharing his expertise, experience, and excellence with the world, here's your host, Paul Ferranbi.
Hi, I'm Paul Ferranbi, and welcome to the IncrediPaul podcast, where we learn to become the best version of ourselves by learning from each other. So today I have Brian Castillo on the podcast. I'm super excited. Me and Brian go way back. I'm not going to go into too much about what he does. I'll let him introduce himself, and then we'll go from there.
Cool. Thanks for the intro, Paul. Yeah, I can't believe it's already been 4 years for me since I was at General Mills, and I know you had left shortly after, so it's been a
Yeah.
while for sure. But yeah, my name is Brian Castillo. I met Paul because we're fellow engineers, so
Mhm.
we both have a chemical engineering background. I also have a master's in systems engineering. I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico, rocking the University of
There
New
you
Mexico
go.
hat. Even though I didn't go there, I'm a Lobo at heart. But yeah, so I'm an engineer, 31 years old. I've got a 19-month-old, been married for going on 5 years now. It's crazy. Can't believe that.
Wow, it's
And
already been 5 years?
dude, 5 years this May, so it's four and a half.
Wow.
And yeah, you were at my wedding, so yeah,
Yeah.
it's been a while. So, but yeah, that's it. I'm still here in the Albuquerque, New Mexico area. I did leave for a little bit early in my career, but this is where I grew up, and I'm back here now, and I'm working for a national laboratory. So that's been fun, and that's where I've been ever since we left, since our paths had crossed to General Mills. So yeah, that's pretty much the sum of it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah. That's funny. I forgot. Yeah, I did leave shortly after you did. So I
Mhm.
think you left like, was it October, November time?
Yeah, because so I just celebrated my 4-year work anniversary.
Ah,
I think I had started the first week in November at Sandia.
okay.
So yeah, so I had put in my 2 weeks in October.
Okay, yeah, that's what I
Mhm.
thought. And then I put in my 2 weeks like right around Christmas time and I
Yeah,
started.
it wasn't too long after.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm sure we'll get into that, but I'm curious. So it seems like you had almost like three different parts to your career. So kind of talk us through the brief stint of what you did when you left Albuquerque. I know you mentioned that.
Sure. Yeah. So I background in chemical engineering, got my
Mhm.
bachelor's of science from New Mexico Tech, and I took a job with ConocoPhillips. And so I was working in the oil and gas field. And for the first like year and a half working there, I pretty much lived outside of a suitcase. They send all their engineers out in the field to get different
Mhm.
field experiences and learn different roles and where you might fit. And I did that for like my first year and a half. Spent a lot of time in Houston, Texas.
Wow.
Found out what traffic really was. And my official title at the time was a process engineer. So
Okay.
I would support anything from like safety valve calculations, like relief valves, to
Mhm.
process modeling of like unit ops and things like that. So I was very much using my chemical engineering degree. It was all about
Mhm.
separations and
Yeah.
things of that. So I actually got to like climb into heat exchangers and like climb a distillation
Wow.
tower and stuff. So that was like my purest chemical engineering job. And then for the second half of that stint, I was there about 3 years. Since I was from Albuquerque, they were like, "Hey, do you want to go to this gas plant in Farmington, New Mexico, kind of in the middle of nowhere?"
Yeah.
And I did at the time because it's funny how you talk about my career. Well, at the time, I was like, "Oh, I'm going to be with Conoco for 30 plus years, like
Yeah.
great paying job. I like the work. I'm
Mhm.
using my degree." And at the time, oil and gas was doing really well,
Mhm.
and I thought I was going to get to do like an expatriateship in
Oh,
Australia or even go to Alaska. But
wow.
obviously, the downturn happened in
Ah,
2015. So I survived like 4 rounds of layoffs, and then who is my now wife, but my girlfriend at the time was working
yeah.
on her master's in Albuquerque, and so I just started to look around, and I saw the General Mills process engineering job open up. And even though it was a decent pay cut, obviously compared the industries,
Yeah.
I gained a lot more in return, right? I wanted to be
Mm.
back in Albuquerque. I was not long distance anymore with
Yeah.
Justine. And so uh, took a process engineering job at General Mills. So that was like kind of the second phase of my career. So
Mhm.
had about 3 years of working experience under my belt at that time. And
Mhm.
then when I was at General Mills, I was the lead process engineer for their bars division. So as
Mhm.
you know, for those that don't, Nature Valley, the crunchy granola bars, and then
Yeah.
the sweet and salty bars, the chewy bars. And
Yeah.
so I was the process engineer there, and that was great too. I was learning a lot. That was more where I worked on, I would say, continuous improvement. Like you're well
Mhm.
aware, that was
Mhm.
what our main focus was, kind of as like line lead team and system engineering. That
Yeah.
strategic outlook, and then working directly with R&D to get whatever testing or modifications they wanted
Yeah.
done to scale that up to mass scale. So I did that both on the crunchy and chewy lines for both
Mhm.
processing and packaging. And I really enjoyed the people there. You're one of the very, great, one of the many great people that I had met during my time there. And I had no intention of leaving there either, but maybe we'll get into this too when we talk career or leadership or anything like that.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
I kind of met a crossroads, right? So it
Yeah.
was one of those things where I had my peers saying I was ready to be promoted, senior
Mm.
system engineer. And then, as we know, had some poor leadership at the time.
Mm.
My direct boss, who was your boss at one point, was very close to retirement, checked out,
Yeah.
didn't have a lot of people who were working to develop their careers. So
Mhm.
it was really at that point, it was like, well, I think if I had moved to Minneapolis or something like that, corporate, I probably would have gotten to where I wanted to at the time.
Mhm.
But I didn't really have that desire. Just got married at General
Yeah.
Mills. Both our families are here. So it just kind of prompted me to look around. I
Yeah.
wasn't unhappy, but then I came up on an opportunity with Sandia National Labs. And
Mhm.
this was an interesting part of my career because I took basically a safety engineering role, and safety had always been a part of my job, but it was
Yeah.
not, the main focal point of my job. And so this was a nuclear safety basis. So I had to learn a
Wow.
lot more about nuclear safety and reactors, and then basically a
Wow.
lot of the regulations and requirements around that. And that was great. Did that my first 2 years, and I was always interested in more of an R&D role. I know you and I shared that just to
Yeah.
kind of be on that side of the fence because I had always been very hands-on with my
Mhm.
engineering, which I loved, but
Mhm.
I wanted kind of a bit more of the technical aspect. So
Mhm.
that's where I kind of got interested in systems engineering, which was funny because at General Mills, I was called a systems engineer, but
Yeah.
I really considered that process
Yeah.
engineering,
Yeah.
and I didn't really know what systems engineering was. And then Sandia paid for my master's, and it was kind of dumb not to do it, so I did it, even though I didn't really want to go back to school after
Yeah.
being out for 6.5 years. But
Mhm.
I actually learned a lot of those principles, and it's like, dang it, if I would have known those going into my General Mills job, it would have been a lot better. But that's okay
Ah.
because I get to draw from those experiences and apply it to
Mm.
like my coursework. So that was cool. So,
That's cool.
but I did that working full time, and then in my current role, I'm actually I'm a senior systems engineer for an extended life program. And so what that kind of means, what I can say about that.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I work at it's called MESA, so microelectronics and science applications.
Yeah.
And it's basically semiconductors for the nuclear weapons complex and facility.
Wow.
So what an extended life program is, as you know, is when these fabs were stood up, they're well past their useful life, and
Mhm.
no one really, we're government contracted basically for the
Mhm.
Department of Energy, and that'd be a big, we're talking a couple $1 billion investment to stand up a new fab that can do the qualifications that we do. So
Wow.
instead of doing that, hey, let's spread out a capital investment over 20 years. So it's called the Extended Life Program. And
Okay.
so that's what I'm doing a lot of now. So it was a lot of heavy systems engineering because it was like standing up a new program. So what are our requirements?
Okay.
How do we get funding? What is our plan for the next 20 years? What are we
Yeah.
basing it off of? Is it useful life of tools? Are they single point failures? What are our risk
Mhm.
metrics? And then now we're kind of in that execution phase. We're 3 years into execution. And so a lot of it has been kind of capital project management oversight and setting up
Okay.
those structures. So it's still kind of production, but it is different
Okay.
because it's government and things like that. And so I would
Yeah.
definitely say I'm doing more project management and systems
Okay.
engineering than I've done in the past, but it's
Yeah.
been a good experience. So that's where I'm at right now. So yeah, those are kind of the three phases of my career for sure. Um, an engineering position at all of them, but
Mhm.
I've obviously been at very different stages of my life too at
Mhm.
those. So it was a little over 3 years at Conoco. It was a little over 3 years at General Mills, and knock on wood now, that seemed to be my shelf life, but it's going on 4 years at Sandia. So um, but the good thing about Sandia too, as you know, with these big corporations,
Mhm.
is you can move around a lot within the company
Mhm.
and almost have several careers
Yeah.
within one organization, right? So uh,
That's really
that's
cool.
that's been a plus too. But
Yeah.
yeah,
That's really cool.
yeah,
Yeah, that's amazing too. Like the 3, 3, and now you have the 4. So you
yeah,
made over the hump of the 3. See how long you can stay here with saying
yeah.
that. That's really cool.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I'm technically lying because I've had two roles there and I made it to 2 years there. And so I'm 2 years at this one, but that's okay.
Oh,
It's still 4 years at the same
yeah, still
organization.
4 years with the same company.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's really cool. The different transitions. So kind of looking back, if you were to go back, like either when transitioning to General Mills or even transitioning from General Mills to Sandia, would you do anything differently, or was there anything you learned along the way that make those, like the first or second transition, was any transition easier or different or anything like
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, sure. So honestly, I got to bring up this. So I know you're religious, and
Yeah.
I was raised very religious. I was
Hmm.
raised hardcore Roman Catholic. I went to Catholic school, but then I was like a rebellious teenager. Like when I went to college and I wasn't living under my parents' house, like I'm not going to church. I kind
Hmm.
of lost my way a little bit, right?
Hmm.
And then when I met Justine, something that was very important to her was she wanted to share a relationship with somebody in faith with God, right? And
Yeah.
so she was doing some non-denominational stuff, which like no, I don't judge anybody's faith, but it just didn't, I
It's
was raised
different.
hardcore Roman
Yeah.
Catholic. So that was like a concert to me, but we found common ground and where we ended up getting married. And I bring this up because each time I transitioned, or even when I was leaving undergrad, when I was heading into my senior semester, I didn't have a job lined up. So I had multiple internships and stuff, but I was like
Mhm.
getting nervous, and I almost accepted two jobs that I wasn't really, like
Mm.
feeling. So like one I had flown out to, it was in Ely or Ely, Nevada. I believe it's Ely, Eli, and
Oh
it was
wow.
for a copper mining company, and they offered me the job, but it was like in the middle of nowhere. You'd live in a mining town. It was like a 3.5 hour drive to Vegas or Salt Lake, but that was like the
Wow.
highlight of it. And then there was a smaller engineering consulting firm that it was like, well, and people at the time were like, why aren't you taking a job, dude? Like, you've got two good job offers. You don't have any experience. Like, these are good. And it just didn't feel right. I was like, so, how I ended up at Conoco was one of our senior design team members had several internships with them, and we had actually taken a trip up to the San Juan gas plant where I eventually ended up working after around a year and a half. But the head engineer there was so impressed, like just with the questions in our project and stuff, and he asked me if I was interested in a job, and so I went through the corporate process, and that's how I got hired on the Conoco. And so that one felt right. It wasn't just a compensation thing. It was, something I wanted to do. We had done our senior design project on it.
Yeah.
And it just felt right. And something kind of told me, like, head that way. Well, fast forward to ConocoPhillips, like, I was still a young, inexpensive engineer doing well with my performance reviews and things like that. So I probably could have been relocated to Houston or maybe a Billings, Montana at the time. They had some assets out there. That's where my good friend in college, that's where she ended up. She's actually still with Conoco. And I think in hindsight, I probably would have ended up on a similar path just because, I believe in myself. The role that I filled also was very close to the product. And so I felt confident that, I would have even been able, through downtimes, they still needed to put out, production, and I likely would have had a job. So, but again, I had that intuition kind of feeling, and that one, I'll be candid, that was a 20% pay cut, and that was after heavy negotiations too. But I had told myself what I was gaining in return was more valuable than that, and I don't see it as taking a step back in my career, honestly, because that propelled me to where I am now. But I think in that transition, it was kind of outweighing that, and that was like, everything's kind of a risk, right? And Justine and I were just dating at that time too. It's not like we were necessarily going to end up together. So I had to make sure that making that decision was for me, and even though she was a factor, I couldn't let that be the main factor. And then,
that's fair.
And then General Mills was my most tricky transition, I think, because I didn't have like the layoff thing, right? Like, that was kind of justifiable. And but in terms of General Mills, I had just run into a tricky situation where I didn't have a manager looking out for my best interest. I had, conflicts of interest with our operations lead who led our department at that time. Something just wasn't clicking when, the senior systems engineer there for Serial, who had been there since plant startup, is like signing off on my promotion. And then like the head engineer at Belvedere was signing off on my promotion. But I was getting blocked. And it was like, what else can you do? And so it was just, so it just didn't feel that great. And then, as some of our peers were struggling through similar issues with plant leadership and just the direction of where we were trying to go and trying to achieve our results. And so that was the first time I was, I don't know if I was close to like just quitting to walk out the door, but that was the closest. I guess I didn't realize how unhappy I was just because of that stuff. And so that's why that transition was interesting for me. And that was, going from Conoco to General Mills, it was a very smooth transition to Fortune 500 companies, very similarly structured. My role was at least somewhat similar. I wasn't doing process modeling, but I was very close to the product. Well, Sandia was a completely unknown entity. I'm going into safety, which, has just always been an aspect of my career. Like, is that really what I wanted to do? Was it worth it? But, I basically got a better promotion than what I would have gotten at General Mills by just transitioning there.
Wow.
And then, in that role, I will say that about transition is that, that one in particular, I was going into something kind of completely unknown. But again, I had that kind of gut feeling that I felt like was pointing me in that direction. That's why I bring up religion, because, regardless of your belief, You could call it intuition, whatever you want to call it. I think there are signs. I truly believe there are signs that point us in various directions, but I also believe in free will, right? So like how you said, would I have done it? Would I have done anything differently? So what I would have potentially done differently, I don't think I would have changed anything with the ConocoPhillips thing, because I think that would have been the same kind of outcome. Even if Justine would have moved with me or something like that, I don't know if I would have still been with them at this time, like, given that. And that was just a great jump start to my career. And I felt like that was the time to leave. If I had done something differently at General Mills, one thing I have learned since then, I learned a lot from that experience, is that, when I first started, it's like, you control your career. You have to take control of your career. You hear that in the corporate Kool-Aid, kickoff meetings and things like that. It's true. I found that out. And, looking back, it's like, I could have probably removed some of those barriers that were happening before they became insurmountable, and I think that, when I reflect back on my own performance and things like that, I should have handled some of that better, because, it made me bitter at the time, right? Because I knew what my value was, and I wasn't being compensated for my value. And so those are probably the two things I would have changed. I think I could have just taken better control of my situation. And who knows, if I would have done that, even just within what was within my control, I probably just wouldn't have had so much anxiety, and honestly, slight depression, which I didn't even realize was taking place until I left. And then, at Sandia, I jumped right in. Safety's not the most exciting thing in the world, let's be honest, but it's always been a part of my job. And so because of my operational background, what they call it at Sandia is work planning and controls, which is basically like operational safety. So very similar to what you and I have been used to, where it includes everything, right from hazard analysis for new projects to risk assessments to safety observations to required paperwork. So in particular, the nuclear facilities, they have different hazard categorizations. And so depending on what hazard category you fall into, there's a lot of requirements that come into play. So just a lot of CYA kind of stuff, right? And so, but I actually did something that, so I've never felt uncomfortable talking or like speaking or anything, but they kind of just they kind of were who's going to draw the short straw, basically, is what they said, to become the new corporate work plan controls instructor and SME. And so I ended up taking on that. I actually redid the entire training. It was pretty outdated. And I actually got a lot of networking done with that, because think about who I was giving the training to: a lot of managers, a lot of engineers in other facilities. And I actually got my name out there a little bit. And and that's kind of how I got this role, because one of the senior managers was like, "You sure you're happy doing 600 work? Yeah, I think he's like, you have a lot of operational experience. I think you should talk to this person." And so then I talked to a senior manager at Mesa who was standing up this program, and based on the job posting. So one thing at Sandia, which is not uncommon with a lot of corporations, is they have an internal postings website, right? And but at Sandia, when it's an internal posting, you can see the hiring manager. So I saw this job come up, and I was like, so again, this is 4 years ago. This is when I had about 7-ish years of experience, and it really sounded like they wanted someone pretty senior, probably someone who knew the semiconductor industry. Like, I don't have a double E degree, things like that. But I reached out to Catherine anyway. I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to get half an hour on her calendar. We talked a lot, very similar, very casual like we are. And, obviously she couldn't tell me to put in or not, but she was just like, she's like, I would encourage you to do so if you think it's right. And long story short, I got an interview, and then I ended up getting hired into this role. And it's been awesome because it was the perfect transition because I did it as I was about halfway through my master's.
Mm,
And I've already been able to apply a lot of those principles from my master's to this
awesome.
role, which has been awesome too. So, key takeaways from everything I just said, because I know I just babbled on a lot, is,
Oh, it's good.
trust your intuition,
Yeah.
weigh out every decision you make, and don't be afraid to make a mistake. Because, you asked me if I would have done something different. I think I would have really enjoyed my career if I would have stayed on those paths. And,
Hmm.
even if I would have eventually gotten laid off at ConocoPhillips, I have nothing but great things to say about that company. They treated me very well. General Mills, even with the bad, way more good.
Hmm.
Got great experience there. I got to meet great people. That's why I'm still talking to you.
Yeah.
And I believe that both of those, again, going back to kind of my religious background, I believe they set me up for getting into Sandia and
Mm,
taking that role and then being where I am today. Um, and going back to the taking control of your career, have those conversations with your manager. That's something I
mhm,
never would do. Don't be afraid. Hey, my goal is to become a senior engineer, a principal
mhm,
engineer, a distinguished
mhm,
engineer. What do I need to do to get there? Tell me what I'm not doing now, and have those tough conversations and see if that person's looking out for your best interest too. Because
mhm.
um, that kind of taking control of your career thing. I've luckily only had one bad manager in my 11ish year career going on
Wow.
now. And even then, I got to say, he wasn't that bad of a manager. He was just disconnected. There was disconnect. And
Yeah.
I could have changed that disconnect. I think I could have been more
Mm,
engaged in that, and I did not. And so that's what I would say now. So now when I came into this program, my manager was actually hired a week after I was, and
wow.
we were both trying to figure a lot of things out. She's got 20 plus years of experience at Sandia, and I'm very upfront with her. One thing that I used to always ask for with my not so great manager experience was, hey, do you have any feedback for me?
Mhm,
Am I doing well? And I never got anything to point me in the, saying, oh yeah, you can improve on this, you should be doing
mm.
this. And then when PMF or performance review time comes around, it's like, oh, you're just meeting expectations. Like, what? Like, so, that there was a disconnect. So now I
Yeah.
make sure none of that happens, right? And don't be afraid just because someone's in a leadership position. I'm not saying to be disrespectful, but don't be
Mhm,
afraid to question that individual, because a manager, as far as I'm concerned, is representing the best interests of the company, but they
mhm.
also have to be representing your best interest as
Yeah.
well. And if they don't have a vested interest in you, then it's probably not going to be a good relationship, and you probably don't want to stay in that relationship too long. So that would be my advice to someone too, just some of the things that I've learned. But you really can make your own luck and fortune. I do believe that. And that's what I mean by taking control of your career. And since that kind of light switch flipped for me and I
Mhm.
took that leap of faith going to Sandia, I've gotten them to pay for a master's. I've gotten 2 promotions. I've had very successful PMFs. I have very successful experience that if I, had to leverage that to go to another job similar, to as you're in transition, I
Mhm.
know I can. And I got a high level of security clearance out of it,
Yeah.
right? So that's just kind of one more feather in the hat, that
Yeah.
I'm a trustworthy individual and things of that nature. So yeah, that's pretty much what I would say about the career stuff so far anyway. So
Yeah. No, that's really cool. I really like when you talked about controlling your career and that intuition. Like, yeah, I wholeheartedly, like I've said on the podcast, I say Jesus is first and I am second. So prayer is something that's always been a part of my life. And I know you mentioned like even in college and stuff being rebellious. I feel like we all go through that. I feel like if you
yeah.
haven't gone through it, it's just a matter of time. I think it's just a part of the process.
Mhm.
But like even with my transitions, like how like we work with General Mills and we we were kind of like, it's interesting that you talked about like with your manager not necessarily being present. I kind of had
Mhm.
the same situation with my manager. It was kind of interesting because I was in a rotational program and I had different rotations, but my manager was kind of different from the manager of the different rotations I was in. And so the same manager that was kind of influencing you and not letting you get a promotion, it was kind of influencing me and not seeing like what I wanted to do long term. Because as far as doing R&D stuff and just getting more of those experiences, and that I think that speaks to how much a manager really matters, that they can make or break your career. Like it's been said that people don't leave companies, they leave their bosses. And I think that's so true, because like what you said with ConocoPhillips and with General Mills, it wasn't the company, it was just a situation that you were in that caused you to look at other opportunities.
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially so when we were at General Mills, right? I think the buzzword of the time I was there was servant leadership, right? What does servant leadership mean? But what I've learned throughout my career, so I've never had any direct reports. Sure, I've had like indirect authority, just leading projects or being an engineer on the line, right? Kind of responsible for the line. I wouldn't say I had, like, I've never had to do performance reviews or any, do any disciplinary actions with any employees or anything like that. But I do feel strongly about this. I feel I have always been a leader. Even entering the workforce as a 22-year-old engineer. And I think it has a lot to do with attitude and not every manager is a leader, and that happens for different reasons. And they could have been a leader at one time, but leadership to me is it's like that JJ Watt quote that I love. I actually used to have it all the time in my little Skype window, and now Teams, I guess. But success is earned and rent is due every day. I feel the same way about leadership too, because I think you could be a natural born leader, but you have to hone in your skills, and you have to apply it to each different situation, right? And different individual for that matter too. And I can see how some people, if they're at different stages or phases, may have been a good leader at one point, but have kind of lost that spark and desire to be. And I hope I don't lose that, because I think one thing about being a good leader, when I think going back to the servant leadership thing, is that you have to be able to lead, follow, and work on a team. Everything is a team. Even if you have a very individual, specific technical role, you're still part of a team. So true. And I think you have to be able to wear all those hats, because I don't think you can know how to lead if you've never followed. And I don't think you can lead if you've never worked well with others. So that's kind of my philosophy when it comes to leadership. And I have been lucky now. I have very good leadership around me, both peers and mentors and managers. So I have everything in that regard, but I know that's not always going to be the case too, right? And so I just got to make sure I continue to be a leader myself. I actually have a graduate intern right now who's going to be joining us full time. So that'll be a fun transition, because I'll still continue to mentor her and everything. But we'll see how that goes. But that's been a good leadership opportunity for me too. Now, like I told you, I still feel like a kid, man. But I'm 31 over here, so I'm just getting older and older. And I have a kid, so all these engineers just getting younger and younger too. So those are the big things, like, in the corporate structure, I think that gets lost. Those are the things they're not going to teach you at school, right? You can't learn that. You have to just learn by doing and experience. And it's been a journey, but it's been fun. So.
I mean, they teach you how to do mass balances, but they don't teach you how to influence others. So it's definitely something they have to learn. And it's really, I like what you talked about, like the rent is due every day. I think that's the key thing with leadership, is I think a lot of leaders feel like they get to a certain peak or title and they've learned everything they need to know and they can just kind of coast. But the thing with leadership, that there is no coasting. Once you start to coast, you start to go backwards. And like once you're not listening to people, or you feel like you're the one that's right, and that you lose that servant leadership, and then you're not able to influence people. No one wants to listen to you, and you have to use your title. And I talk about in a previous podcast about like different levels of leadership, And the title, like what you talk about, some people are managers, but they're not leaders because all they're doing is trying to use their title. Like, hey, I'm your boss, you need to do this, but there's no relationship there. They know nothing about you. They don't know how you work, what you're striving for. Like you mentioned, really working with your leadership and your managers on what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish. And I think we that was another, but I think there's a bunch of buzzwords while we're at General Mills about removing barriers and breaking down barriers. But I think it's really true that if you're a good leader, you're not seeking to get your own way. You're trying to help your people succeed and help the company succeed, not just you being right all the time.
No, I agree. Yeah, it was too much buzzwords and no action, right? And truthfully, at least, and this is just my opinion, self-reflection looking back, but I think that was part of the disconnect, truly, because there was that transition where the company wanted to truly empower the technician, the person who was literally interacting with the product. And I almost feel like all support staff, from engineers to leads, process leads, operational leads, the ones that really took that to heart and tried to best represent the technician and the process were the ones that, basically were looked down upon, and eventually we all just ended up leaving, or we stayed and were miserable.
Seriously.
And that's again why I found it ironic about servant leadership, because I don't like that. I don't really like that term, but I understand it. We were too buzzwordy with it, but to me, servant leadership, it is, serving your purpose for the individuals around you, serving your team to the best interests so that you get the best desired outcome for you. I think there's a piece that a lot of people miss. So genuineness and authenticity. As you're well aware, we had plant managers, they weren't afraid to go during, a planned stop and go, sweep or pick up something, but it just felt out of place. It wasn't authentic. Right. And then you even had, our ops manager who was, in my opinion, very shady with numbers and things like that, very self-driven. But she wasn't the one who was showing up at the plant at 2 a.m. or working a 21-hour day. Like I was, like, with the people on the line, troubleshooting, problem solving, thinking about that, just too caught up in numbers. And numbers, we're supposed to be data driven, but there's no problem with being data driven. But going back to the General Mills principles of people, process, and what was it?
Performance or something.
Performance, they never wanted to blame the people, and they never wanted to give the credit to the people. And I'm sorry, we still have the people element, and it's so important, especially I'm sure you've experienced. So I've been working primarily from home the last 2 years. I miss that human interaction, that element of the workplace. And I've made a point to with my newer team over the last 2 years to have video conferencing meetings, to try to get together as things have relaxed in the world and stuff, because I think you need that genuine human connection in order to be successful, no matter what you're doing. So.
No, that's so true. And I've been fortunate or unfortunate, depending on how you look at it, like throughout COVID, that I didn't really stop traveling. There was about a 2.5 month period in March 2020 up until like end of May that I stopped traveling. But since then, I was pretty much full speed, at least 50%, sometimes 75% travel. So I was in the factories and the vendors. So at least for me, I still had to have that relationship with people. When I wasn't traveling, I was at home. But I do see how it makes a difference. Like there are a couple of weeks when I would be at home, not traveling, just being on meetings where no one is showing their camera, or people can't even get the microphone to work, or it's on mute, and all the stuff that we've seen through COVID the last couple of years. But that human interaction is so critical, and that's one of the reasons why I stayed with Purina so long. Like you mentioned, I've been here 4 years, or about 4 years. By the time this the podcast comes out, I'm no longer with Purina. So it's, and that's a whole story to itself, how that happened. But that's more so around the timing of things, like being newly married and trying to travel less, stay in St. Louis. And like, it goes back to what you were mentioning with kind of controlling your career, having those conversations. So I've been fortunate with Purina that I learned, I guess I got to learn it early on in General Mills. And I even when I was coming into Purina, I was saying like, this is where I want to go, head in the R&D direction. I started off in continuous improvement, was there a year, almost 2 years, moved over to the technical side and packaging. And when I moved over to that side and those different department, I was clear with them saying like, hey, like my background's in chemical engineering, I want to get close to the process side, but close to the R&D side. And they're like, okay, we're going to try and get you there. So much in that after a year, I got a promotion to move on to the process side. And that's the role I was in, working with, doing a lot of capital work and stuff. But then, like I said, just with the travel and everything, and just because Purina is kind of a really flat organization, so you can kind of get promoted in place, but there's not like big jumps or chances to do like a lot of people leadership, which is what I wanted to develop. That I, like you mentioned, had a lot of influencing roles, which I think having those is important, but it's also developing more, seeing what the dynamics is to actually manage people. And that's something I've been looking for, and that kind of why I making the jump as well.
Yeah, work-life balance is key, especially now, like that I have a little one. But even before, you're talking about marriage is a big transition. I think a lot of the times when we talk about marriage, very similar to leadership and why management fails is because it's work. You have to nurture it. Yeah, I've been married 4.5 years now. Been with my wife 8 years, a little over 8 years, and it's work. If we both didn't work at it, we would have already failed. We would have just already become another statistic. And that, again, I go back to everything in life is risk. If you think about it, right? Getting married is a risk, especially for a male in our society. Having a kid, it's a risk. Taking on a totally new position, it's a risk. Going out on your own to start something like a podcast, it's a risk, right? But guess what? None of us make it out of this life alive. So
that's true.
I think we should take all the calculated risks that we can. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not, I'm a frugal person. I like gambling and stuff, but I hate losing $20. And that was before inflation. So now it's more like I hate losing like $40, I guess. but no, to your point, you have to take those risks, that have them be calculated. Trust your intuition, thinking, reflect on it yourself. Is this the right time for me to be making a move? And that's probably the only thing that I would have changed in the transitions. Maybe I'd have done it a little sooner. Maybe I'd have done it a little later. It just depends, because if I look back on it too, there was a lot of transitional change at General Mills. Who knows? Maybe you got some of those bad eggs out, and then we would have gotten to where we wanted to in our careers. I don't know. True. But I also am not going to play the what if game or regret, because I've gained so much just in this transition too. And to my point about the companies, if if an opportunity ever came up to rejoin one of those companies and it was the right place, right time, I would have no problem at least looking into the opportunity, right? Because the company didn't leave me with a bad taste in my mouth, and we left on amicable terms. And I'm a big advocate of never burning bridges, for sure too. So
that is so true, because it's funny how you never know like where you're gonna see someone again. Like it was like there was someone that used to work at Purina, was working at another company, and then I know I was trying to get someone someone was applying for a position that used to work at Purina, and then they were able to link up. And it's just really interesting that like maybe you work with someone at this point, and then maybe it's 5 years down the road, they're able to help you get somewhere else, or even in a different city or things like that. You just never know how things are going to go.
Well, and going back to kind of making genuine connections in your network, why it's so important. I mean, think about it, even how our paths crossed.
Yeah.
I was an engineer there for about a year. You happen to be in that rotational program for new engineers coming into
Yeah.
our department. Like I didn't really have to interact with you all that much, especially
Yeah.
outside of work, right? But
Yeah. It's
we
true.
did.
Yeah.
And just because we're relatively the same age and stuff, that
Yeah.
doesn't mean a whole lot, right? Like,
Yeah.
and so here we are now doing a podcast together, 4 years after we even left that job. And
Yeah.
it's not like we're talking every day, but
Yeah.
we've kept in touch whenever
Yeah.
you've been in the area, you've come out. And
Yeah.
it's been, great. And I love seeing how successful you are, man. I love,
Thank
I
you.
love not only just, I love people in my circles succeeding, but one thing that is part of both of our stories too is our ethnicity and background too as
Yes.
engineers, right? And
Yeah.
it's not something I focus on a lot, right?
Mhm.
But it is something I am proud of when I
Yeah.
see minority engineers just
Yeah.
kicking ass in the world, man. It's
Yeah.
awesome, right? Because we look a little different than some other folks, right? I mean, just be honest.
Yeah.
Although let's be real, like in most other parts outside of the Southwest, people probably just think I'm white anyway. So I do have that Italian background, but
Yeah.
no, I think that's part of the story too. I think what's been awesome in my career as well is that I've had a lot of female leadership. And I've had a lot of female engineering peers. I've worked with a lot of minority leaders, engineers, things of that nature. So it's been awesome to see because you do hear about the people who kind of paved the way for us too, right? And we want to continue to be pioneers for others.
Yes.
And I think that's been something I'm definitely focused on more as I move forward into my career, kind of setting the tone and that example for people behind me, right? So
yeah, so that's really cool. No, I like that. I say we got a little flavor to engineering.
I like it. Hey, little spice.
No, I think it's good. But we're almost out of time. But is there anything you wish I had asked you or anything else you want to talk about before we kind of wrap things up?
No. So, I love what you're doing with your podcast. I've listened to a few episodes. I think it's awesome.
Thank you.
I actually started my own a little bit earlier this year. I've taken like a month break from it, but as you know, I'm super into fitness and food.
Yeah.
I'm a foodie. And so that's kind of what that's all about and stuff. So I really enjoyed this. Maybe sometime I could have you as a guest. I've only done it the solo way so far, just like half-hour episodes, kind of talking about the journey I went on my fitness and health journey to help people. But no, I think, if you would have me again, I think we could get into a little bit deeper of the intricacies at General Mills and maybe some of those problem areas that I think still exist very much so in big corporations, especially, right? And so we can dive into some of those topics if you want to at some point. But I really appreciate you having me on, Paul. I love what you're doing. Keep killing it, brother. It's awesome.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you being on here. And you want to tell the people listening what your podcast is called?
Sure. Yeah. So it's Never Skip Egg Day podcast. You can find it on all your major platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. It's all about, foodie, fitness, and health. I used to be 270 pounds, and I've kept off those 80 pounds for the better part of the last decade. And I still love food. I still love junk food. Paul will know. Every time he comes here, we got to get those junk food, New Mexican breakfast burritos and things like that. But Never Skip Egg Day podcast, and the Instagram page is at Never Skip Egg Day podcast as well. If you want to check that out, I post recipes weekly when I do post an episode. So
awesome. That's really cool. I definitely think we can get into more of that stuff with General Mills, and definitely I've seen it here at Purina, and I'm sure I'll see it at the next place as well. It's just some of that stuff that exists. I think I've learned a little bit better how to navigate it, but some of it just happens. You just have to figure out when it's the best time to jump ship or go to a different department, different company. I don't want to get too much into that because we could go like another hour.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But how can people find you on like socials, websites, or do you want to focus on your podcast or?
You could find me on LinkedIn if you have any professional questions and things like that. I love mentoring people. We can maybe talk about mentorship, at some point in another time. But I'm on Instagram. if you're a little bit older, I'm on Facebook. Brian Castillo. I don't know my exact handles, but usually there's a 13 in them. You can tell who I am. But yeah. And if you want me to provide an email address, I could do that too. But yeah, I've just been, on the side focusing on my podcast, just kind of learning that and doing it for fun for the most part. But yeah, been great.
Yeah, so I can put a link to all of that in the notes for the podcast so people can find them, so they can find it. But for everyone listening, I hope you learned something that helps you take you to that next level, whether it's just like managing your career or just choosing your different adventures or whatever it is that we talked about. I know we talked about a lot of different things. Really glad Brian was able to come on the podcast. But until next time, just enjoy your day and just keep being incredible.
Thank you for listening to the IncrediPaul podcast with Paul Ferranbi. We hope you enjoyed. Be sure to rate and review this podcast on your favorite podcast listening platform. We'll see you here next time. And be incredible.